A 50-year-old attack jet, built to kill Soviet tanks in Germany, is right now hunting speedboats in one of the most contested waterways on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. 20 million barrels of oil pass through it every single day. That is 20% of everything the world burns, and right now, it is closed. Iran declared it shut on March 4th. Ships stopped moving. Insurance companies pulled their coverage overnight. The price of fuel, fertilizer, shipping, your grocery bill, all of it is on the line. And the aircraft America sent to break that blockade is not the F-35. It is not a stealth bomber. It is the A-10 Warthog, a plane so old the Air Force has been trying to kill it for a decade, a plane so slow it cannot outrun most commercial aircraft, and a plane that, music as of right now, is tearing apart Iran's fleet of fast attack boats one strafing run at a time. How is an aircraft designed in the 1970s enforcing a 21st century naval blockade? The answer is something almost nobody in Washington wants to admit. Here is what the Air Force told Congress for a decade. The A-10 is obsolete, too slow, too vulnerable, a single mission relic from the Cold War. They tried to retire it in 2014, 2016, 2018, 2021, 2023. Congress blocked them every single time. The Air Force finally scheduled the last of the fleet for the scrapyard by the end of 2026. Then Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, and suddenly the plane nobody wanted became the plane nobody can do without. We are going to show you exactly why. Not the marketing version, the real reason. It comes down to one fundamental mismatch that the entire modern Air Force cannot solve, and the Warthog can. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. That is it. 21 miles separating the Persian Gulf from the Gulf of Oman, and by extension, from the rest of the world. There is no practical alternative route. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline to the Red Sea. The UAE has a pipeline to Fujairah. Together, they can move about 2.6 million barrels a day around the strait. The world needs 20 million. The math does not work. Iran knows this. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, has spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Not to fight the US Navy ship to ship, that would be suicide, but to make the strait so dangerous, so unpredictable, that commercial shipping simply stops trying. Their weapons are mines, drone boats, and swarms of fast attack craft, small, cheap, fast. Iran has hundreds of them. By March 2nd, a senior IRGC official officially confirmed the strait was closed. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre reported 10 attacks on ships in the first 4 days alone. 5 crew members killed on 2 vessels. Insurance companies suspended coverage for Persian Gulf transits entirely. The world's largest shipping line stopped sending ships. The obvious answer is, send fighters, send the F-35, send the F-15. They are faster, more survivable, and more capable against modern air defenses. That is the Pentagon's argument for retiring the A-10 in the first place. Here's the problem. Speed is a liability when your target is a speedboat. An F-35 cruises at around Mach 1.6. That is over 1,000 miles per hour. An Iranian fast attack boat moving at 45 knots across a 21-mile strait takes roughly 20 minutes to cross. An F-35 covers that same distance in under 90 seconds. The pilot has maybe 2 passes under ideal conditions to identify, track, and engage a small maneuvering boat before he has overflown the entire combat zone. Miss the identification window, and the boat is gone into the Iranian coastline. The A-10 tops out at 450 knots. That is slow enough to circle, slow enough to loiter, slow enough to watch a target for minutes, not seconds, before pulling the trigger. That is not a weakness in this environment. That is the entire mission. On February 2nd, 2026, Exactly 26 days before the war started, a single A-10C flew armed overwatch for the USS Santa Barbara, an Independence-class littoral combat ship conducting mine countermeasures exercises in the Arabian Gulf. The loadout visible in CENTCOM photos: 500-pound joint direct attack munitions, a Lantern targeting pod, advanced precision kill weapon system, 2 rockets, and a 600-gallon centerline fuel tank for extended loiter. This was not an accident. The U.S. military had been rehearsing this mission for at least 2.5 years. In September 2023, 2 A-10s trained against simulated surface targets alongside the USS Stetham in the Gulf of Oman. The Warthog had a maritime role the Air Force publicly downplayed while quietly expanding. Now, look at what the aircraft actually carries into combat. The GAU-8/A Avenger, a 30mm 7-barrel rotary cannon mounted directly on the nose. It fires 3,900 rounds per minute, 65 rounds every single second. Against an Iranian speedboat with thin aluminum hull plating, a single burst is decisive. Then there are AGM-65 Maverick missiles, infrared or electro-optically guided, able to lock onto the heat signature of a boat engine from miles away. And APKWS, laser-guided rockets for precision engagement of smaller craft where a Maverick is too much. The Warthog can carry up to 16,000 pounds of mixed ordnance across 11 hardpoints. Everything we just described, the guns, the missiles, the loiter time, that is the surface of it. That is the part the Air Force focuses on when they argue the A-10 is a Cold War relic. Low and slow on the modern battlefield means easy target for radar-guided missiles. They are not wrong about that, but none of that is the real story here. The real story is what the Warthog does that no other platform in the U.S. inventory can replicate in this specific environment. It can establish persistent armed overwatch over a 21-mile strait, day and night, for hours, waiting. The threat is not just the boats Iran is using right now. The threat is the 3,000 miles of unidentified coastline where new boats, new mines, and new drone launches could originate at any moment. You need something that can hang in the air and watch. The F-35 burns fuel at a rate that gives it maybe 90 minutes on station before it has to go find a tanker. The A-10, with external tanks and aerial refueling, can loiter indefinitely. Here is the number that changed the conversation in Washington. By March 19th, the U.S. military had already confirmed destroying more than 120 Iranian naval vessels and 44 mine-laying watercraft. Not in weeks, in 20 days. The A-10 did not do all of that alone, but CENTCOM confirmed it in the room. Admiral Brad Cooper, CENTCOM commander, said on March 16th that U.S. forces would continue to rapidly deplete Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation. The A-10 was already hunting. Operation Epic Fury, that is the name of the campaign. CENTCOM confirmed the 10 Thunderbolt. 2 aircraft were employed within the first 48 hours of operations against Iranian targets. This was not a secondary deployment. The Warthog was in the fight from day one. By March 15th, CENTCOM released imagery of A-10C Thunderbolt IIs receiving fuel in flight while supporting the operation, the first official visual confirmation of the aircraft in the campaign. And then on March 19th, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, walked up to the Pentagon podium and said it out loud: "The A-10 Warthog is now engaged across the southern flank, targeting fast attack watercraft in the Strait of Hormuz." Think about what that means structurally. The southern flank of the strait runs along the Iranian coastline. That is not a safe place to fly a slow aircraft. The IRGC has shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles, manpads positioned along the coast. An A-10 operating at low altitude over contested water is inside that threat envelope. The Air Force knows this, and yet the mission is happening because the alternative, letting Iranian fast-attack boats operate freely in a 21-mile choke point that controls 20% of global oil supply, is worse. By March 29th, a second wave of A-10s was authorized. The New York Times reported on April 1st that the Air Force was dispatching 18 additional Warthogs to join the roughly 12 already in theater, bringing the 75th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron to 30 aircraft. A-10s were also confirmed supporting search and rescue operations that recovered 2 downed F-15E airmen from Iranian territory. One A-10 was lost in those missions. The pilot was rescued. Here is what most people do not know about the Hormuz closure. This is the shareable fact, the one that reframes everything. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas published analysis in March 2026 that found the closure of the Strait of Hormuz removes close to 20% of global oil supplies from the market. Their model projects that keeping the strait closed through the second quarter of 2026 is expected to raise the average West Texas intermediate price of oil to $98 per barrel and lower global real GDP growth by an annualized 2.9 percentage points. That is not an oil story. That is a food story, a supply chain story, a job story. Every percentage point of GDP contraction hits the lowest income households first and hardest. The fertilizer that comes through Hormuz feeds farms. The LNG that comes through Hormuz heats homes. Gulf supplies almost 80% of global LNG trade, and every molecule of it transits the strait. So, when you see a 40-year-old American attack jet turning Iranian speedboats into scrap metal in Persian Gulf waters, understand what is actually at stake. Every day that strait stays closed, the global economy loses ground. It will take years to recover. Every Iranian fast attack boat the A-10 removes from the equation is one less threat that has to be escorted around, one less mine layer that can deny passage. The blockade that began on April 13th has seen U.S. forces turn back 23 additional vessels attempting transit. A-10s and Apache helicopters are flying visible deliberate combat air patrols over the strait, a calculated display of coercive force for an Iranian audience watching from the shore. And then there is this, the FY 2026 National Defense Authorization Act signed in December 2025 prohibited the Air Force from reducing the A-10 inventory below 103 aircraft through September 30th, 2026. Congress had blocked retirement again. The Air Force had not budgeted for sustainment. They estimated keeping the fleet flying would cost $423 million they intended to spend elsewhere. Iran made that argument irrelevant. On April 28th, Secretary of the Air Force Troy Mike announced the decision. The A-10 Warthog will remain in service through 2030, extended, preserved, because the one scenario the retirement advocates never modeled was the scenario that actually happened. A cramped maritime choke point, swarms of cheap asymmetric threats, a mission where loiter time beats speed every time. The aircraft they built to kill Soviet tanks in Germany is now the aircraft keeping the lights on in Asia. If this changed how you see the Hormuz crisis, subscribe now. Next week, the Iranian weapon that no one in Washington is talking about, the drone boat. How a $2,000 unmanned speedboat loaded with explosives is already sinking $100 million assets, and what the U.S. Navy is doing about it. You do not want to miss it.